Good morning. It's 11 o'clock and you're almost done with your conference. But thank you for coming to this lightning round session focused on out-of-the-box thinking, entrepreneurship, and technology trends. I'm Rachel Fleming. I'm going to be the moderator. We have 4 presentations today. Unfortunately, Lisa Zilinski from Carnegie Mellon University won't be joining us. Her slides will be available on the conference website, so we're just going to have a little bit more time for questions at the end. Our first presenter this morning is Michael Rodriguez from the University of Connecticut, talking about innovation workspaces.
Thank you, and good morning, everyone. Thank you for staying to the bitter end, almost. This is a short talk, and it's based on a chapter I recently contributed to a soon-to-be-published LEADA guide on entrepreneurship. And my thesis is essentially that innovation spaces for library staff is one of the engines that powers internal entrepreneurship, or intrapreneurship, if you're into business jargon. And that can basically be defined as staff-led initiatives to revitalize organizations from within by creating new or improved products, services, or processes. And one of the steps forward is to create innovation workspaces. Now, we already have spaces that are spatially appealing, that are welcoming, that are engaging. The challenge is that many of these are mostly public-facing spaces. So they are the learning commons and the maker spaces and the innovation studios and the incubators and other kind of buzzwords for physical spaces designed to foster creative problem solving through technology and collaboration. But these spatial redesigns have not necessarily carried over into spaces for library staff. And here you see what is an unfortunate representative of what commonly constitutes library staff spaces. The cubicle farms, the spaces that are suited specifically for individual work or for meetings that have a particular task or purpose in mind. And this is a very generalistic characterization, but I think the distinction between public and staff spaces is nicely brought out by this quote from Elliot Felix in a Library Journal article back in 2015. Now I'll let you take a quick look at that before I move on to the next quote, which kind of encapsulates how attitudes are beginning to rapidly evolve in many libraries, exemplified in this NCSU library's quote from their master plan that really highlights the need for these open and collaborative workspaces that are driven not by hierarchy but by functional groupings and the need to promote an entrepreneurial culture within the workplace. So libraries have struggling budgets. We have 1 million priorities that are extremely significant beyond staff spaces. And there is perhaps an inherent bias against spending money and credibility on staff spaces and intranets and tools when our own users' experiences are commonly seen as suboptimal, shall we say. So the business case for creating these spaces for staff is to facilitate engagement and productivity, freer exchange of ideas, generation of opportunities for cross-departmental and grassroots collaboration, and this ultimately impacts issues such as staff retention and engagement and morale. So for this talk, I've identified 7 types of innovation spaces, and I'm actually doing really well on time. Wow. The first is collaboration. So most library spaces, as I mentioned earlier, are configured for individual work, and collaboration spaces right now are mostly the meeting rooms where you come together for specific tasks or projects. One way to perhaps optimize these spaces is not only adding technology to them, so projector boards and so on, but also perhaps adding more old school technology, such as whiteboards or smartboards, so staff can sketch or scrawl, kind of visualize these complex ideas and collaborate in an engaged way as possible. Flexible spaces are also essential. So certainly our work requires us to concentrate rather than collaborate a lot of times. As a licensing manager at UConn, I don't really need to collaborate with anyone. I just need to take 2 hours and really drill down on that license. Not always 2 hours, but sometimes. So commonly these spaces are described as, particularly in the tech industry, that you talk about open floor plans. And that brings staff together, sure, but it also drives you nuts with distractions, especially if you're an introvert, as the majority of us are. So what I'm talking about in flexible spaces is really looking at maybe you have that cubicle farm environment, but also designate closed-doored or acoustically private offices for focus work, or as quiet spaces for workers to recharge their social batteries, and offer a range of spaces that workers can choose from based on their tasks and on their working styles. There was a great article recently published that focused on a collaboration between the company Steelcase and Susan Cain, the author of Quiet, which talks about how introverts can maximize themselves in the workplace. It was a really interesting article. I definitely recommend Googling it if you have a chance. And what they really highlighted is that the key is choice. And that ties into my next thesis of worker-driven spaces. So do your workers exercise some degree of control or autonomy or agency over not only their work, but the spaces in which that work takes place? So are they free to customize their workplaces? Can they choose between a laptop and a desktop, a standing desk or a sitting desk? Is there an ability to telecommute, or maybe even roam with your laptop and find a different office if you need to sort of disrupt your routine and think more creatively? On this slide, I wanted to distinguish between the seeming chaos of a working space with scrawled notes everywhere, for example, versus the detritus that builds up over the centuries in poorly maintained common areas. So bureaucratic and physical clutter, whether in the form of rote, meaningless tasks or endless files of unused papers, it makes it difficult for people to kind of prioritize and concentrate on tasks. Everybody gets those email notification pop-ups that are just devastating for your ability to focus. So decluttering, in my experience, can quite literally free up space for innovation. I had no idea how much office space opens up when 12 boxes and a filing cabinet of old documents are swept into the dustbin of history. And this is a nice area for zero-budget innovation as well, I might add. Virtual spaces, obviously essential in today's workplace, and not just virtual conferencing like Skype or Google Hangouts, but another essential technology at UConn and elsewhere is now Slack. So that's a collaboration application that cuts down on emails and non-essential meetings by enabling messaging, private or team-based communication on channels or groups that you can set up within your organization. I'm also a big fan of using Trello as kind of a team management, project management tool that goes beyond the checklist and the email that typically governs such projects. But above all, innovation spaces should include opportunities for serendipity. We talk a lot about serendipity in the context of library discovery and user experience. I want to talk about it in the context of people. So by serendipity, I don't mean the kind of premeditated staff get-togethers for specific functions. So for example, your meeting. But rather fortuitous interactions that lead to idea exchange and opportunities for collaboration and innovation beyond your immediate coworkers. I want to cite a study here. So the University of Michigan recently found that when researchers are in a building, housed in a building, and their walking patterns overlap, say something as simple as walking from their office to the restroom, collaborations increased by 20% for every 100 feet of zonal overlap. That's a really long hallway, but you get the picture. And the same University of Michigan study also found that collaborations increased 33% among researchers inhabiting the same building and 50% among researchers inhabiting the same floor, regardless of what their particular discipline was or how their expertise otherwise overlapped. So this creates some interesting opportunities, perhaps, to create staff spaces that mingle and co-locate personnel from different departments and different areas. And maybe if it's a new building or a dramatic redesign is planned, to look at how to position restrooms, elevators, kitchens, hallways, and other common areas to maximize serendipitous interaction. Kind of a neat example of this is Google. So Google actually, it's a clever little thing, but they actually arranged their cafeteria tables in such a way as to cause colleagues to be more likely to physically bump into each other. And then that can trigger an interaction that might not otherwise have taken place. It's that little serendipitous encounter that's so important, especially in our somewhat siloed work environments. And obviously, all of these spaces should be psychologically safe and physically healthy spaces. So they have to be welcoming and inclusive of everyone, and everyone participating in that space needs to feel comfortable partaking in those conversations. You need to have honest and energetic and sensitive discussions and avoid disagreements feeling personal. Oh, thank you. But if team members feel too psychologically unsafe to articulate radical or risky ideas or to challenge others' ideas, then those teams will not perform as effectively and innovation is doomed to falter. I didn't really want to give you a lot of real-world examples, but I will say that UConn's embarking on a major space redesign project, and I've heard great things about NCSU as well. There's some limits to this model. Couple minutes, just one more minute. Certainly budgetary constraints, priorities, and also perhaps library cultures that are not fostering of grassroots innovation. So my conclusion is that spaces foster innovativeness and that they can drive staff engagement and satisfaction, and ultimately that benefits end users without necessarily requiring major infrastructure investments by libraries. So administrative funding and mandates for creating innovation spaces are vital, of course, but the goal should be to foster innovations and collaborations led by the workers themselves. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions at the end of the session.
Next up is Jeffrey, can you say your last name?
Sowder.
Sowder? Jeffrey Sowder from Emory University.
Okay, good morning. Better move this up. So I'm here to talk about ways of gathering and reporting data that are a little bit untraditional. So one way we want to start is to get personal. If I can flip this the right way, just hit the button in the middle. Okay. So I'm going to talk about some really unconventional ways. Keeping a diary is the ultimate tracker. You can use it for any purpose. Andy Warhol, I think, kept a diary recording every cab fare he ever paid. One of the reasons he did it was practical because it was a tax write-off. I think Mae West had something else in mind. But one thing that we have to remember is that purposeful activity tracking does offer benefits. So what I want to talk about for a minute is the quantified self movement, but not in any really a very personal way. I just want to show you some of my outdoor exercise activity briefly. So remember, we're talking about data, ways of presenting it. So these are really just raw, uncooked data, which is kind of what you start out with everywhere. That's sort of the source for every data source. So if you play with your phone a little bit, you can make it look a little prettier. So here's a data visualization tip. But this actually counts, instead of just the raw data of the movement, or, the distance that you've gone, it counts the flights you've climbed, walking and running distance, and your steps. But if you turn your phone sideways, you actually get, you can get, or what I love is called auto scale. Try it, it's really fun. So this, you can see, this is a visualization of outdoor exercise activity over a month. And you can really see a pattern here, and so that's kind of what we're really trying to look for when we keep metrics and track things. So with the pattern here, I won't go into detail about this, but you can see the blank spaces and the dots versus the big bars. So about somewhere in the middle of the month, I really walked 15 miles. I don't know how or why, but that was kind of interesting. So let's see. One of the things to remember is one of the things we do in the workplace is we kind of overlook the everydayness of what we do. And with acquisitions work, it's very easy just to count the typical statistics that every library counts. But what we tried to do in the last couple of years is innovate a bit in my units. And so the everydayness of being overlooked, that's why this phrase, you can't manage what you don't measure, is kind of important. So here's another example of an obvious tracking device. The sleep cycle is really interesting. Somebody with regular sleep pattern is on the top. Somebody who's under influence of quite a bit of alcohol is also showing a lot. So one of the reasons you want to track yourself and others is to sort of measure, measure the impact of your behavior. Changing your behavior or changing your outcomes is kind of your goal setting and process. Goal mapping is kind of what you're trying to do here. So one of the things we really have to remember is that people are not only doing the counting, but they actually, count. So one of the things, sorry, I have to turn these on. So it's not we have a mountain of data that we collect in libraries, and we find that people are behind them. They're counting the stuff with the potential for telling compelling stories. Sometimes the data, the way we report it, we're not telling a compelling story, we're just reporting some of that raw data you've seen before. So, moving on, I'll let you read this quote, I can't read it out loud, but I think this is just an example. I wanted to prove that it's not just me saying this, that the people behind the statistics and the metrics and all of that are the thing that we're trying to, well, that's what we're trying to reveal. We wanted to go to library administrators and show them what our people are doing, but also how well we're doing, hopefully. So one way to do this is I decided, we can't just go on counting our metrics the same way we've always done it. We have to try to look at things differently. And when we look at things differently, we might see what the impact that we're doing has, and then we might be able to do things differently. So at the end of this presentation, there are 2 slides that are hopefully really pretty, and that's what we're aiming to show you, but I'm not telling you how to visualize your data here. There was a huge pre-conference, day-long event on that. But basically, it's a process. So what you want to do is have fun with it. Remember I said you want to look at your data over and over, try to reconfigure it in your own mind. You can do this on paper. You don't need a tool. So here I put question marks where I had nothing going on in my outdoor exercise at all, so I have to ask myself why. Those little dots are kind of disconcerting. I did get out of the chair that day, but I didn't go very far. So one thing to remember is that when you really try to review your data, take a hard look at your data collection, what your practices are, and this face in this slide shows you how startling some of the results can be. So having said this, if you read through this quickly, I hope you can see this. These are typical things: how many orders placed, how many rush orders placed, how many duplicates and claims. These are the standard metrics that pretty much go up the chain, and they don't really tell the whole story of what's going on. I have 5 people in my acquisitions unit, and they're doing way more than this, but it's totally invisible because we weren't counting it and we weren't reporting it. So what we decided to do was create an off-the-grid tracker that tracked, these are all very specific projects that relate to Emory. We do a lot of area studies. We get books from all over the world that nobody else catalogs, and we tracked a lot of different things. We tracked specific language materials that we get in a large quantity to show how they differ from our ordinary foreign language approvals, and that's one of the things I'm going to focus on a metric to show you today. But I won't read through this whole list, but we just tried to look at things differently. Everything we received, we decided to use a Google tracker. We do this by time process, so we know the date that everything is done, and we can see by quarter, by fiscal quarter, how the patterns jump up and down. If there are errors in receiving, or if something goes straight to stacks, like in our cataloging on receipt, or whatever falls out, we count that on a daily basis. It sounds like a lot of overhead, but people don't seem to mind doing it, especially when the outcome is that they can see their individual contribution over time. So basically, in our institution, we have a license to Tableau. It's extremely expensive. It's not a tool everybody's going to be able to use. I don't really use it that much either. All I did was dump all of our data in here in this big data store, and that column on the right with the little check boxes just allows you to create little different views of your data. So I got to cheat a little bit in terms of playing with my data. I could just click on a box and say, oh wow, look at the shelf ready fallout. I didn't have to do it in an Excel spreadsheet. But without having to do this, there are lots of other tools that will do something similar, or you can just think about it on paper. So I tried to say what goes straight to stacks when we catalog and receipt, what falls out. And then I decided, okay, let's try to visualize this. So no matter how much you talk about data visualization, it's never purely visual. Remember, you're trying to tell a story here, so this is not one of the pretty ones. This is one of the ugly ones, but this is one of our data visualizations that tried to show our cataloging on receipt, how out of all the stuff that we cataloged on receipt, it was a little under 5,000, it was like 4,000 something. We had 2,734 things that were cataloged by us in acquisitions, 1,542 were routed, and the 135 were duplicates, things that we already had in the collection. That tells us something, and that tells us there was an impact, that we actually did that much, but it doesn't compare it to what's going on in the cataloging department, how much is not going on in the workflow, except for what's routed. So I tried to visualize it another way, so we came up with, I don't know how well you can see this either, but that slide isn't too great. But basically, we just did, in a basic pie chart, we knew that we had routed, the one on the left is what I just reported to you in the other slide. 44% was routed to the in-process workflow for cataloging, and 53% of the total were cataloged by us, and 3% duplicates. On the other side, we compared it to the total number, and I don't have the numbers here, but I do in a different visualization. We compared it to all the in-house cataloging for print monographs versus the acquisition staff cataloging on receipt. And it turns out that over the entire fiscal year, FY16, we did 23% in acquisitions and 77% of in-house cataloging was done in the cataloging department. So that was rather significant. And this took about 3 years for us to do this. So we decided to do this with a few staff people in the beginning, and now we have 3 people doing it full time. And so I'll show you another example. This is an iPad app that is free. It's based on Tableau. It's produced by them. It's called Visible, V-I-Z. That's in the title slide. This actually, I was trying to show over the quarters of the fiscal year how many of our foreign language approvals were Spanish and Portuguese vendors, which is we have a special selector who does a lot of buy-in trips and there's a really heavy workload. And I wanted to show how much that really eats up the proportion of what we do with foreign language approval plans that are non-shelf ready that we have to do. So, I mean, these are the raw numbers, and it's just the numbers and then the percentage at the end. But that wasn't really visual, so I did it in numbers, which is the Mac version of Excel. That's not very pretty either. It's the same data represented in different ways. There's like a bar graph, and then there's the numbers graphs that shows you combined. Green would be the non-Spanish Portuguese vendors. But this is the actual data visualization we ended up with. Now remember, we played with numbers a lot to get to this. So you won't see the actual numbers in there, but all we did was divide it by quarter, and we found that the sort of light blue is the Spanish-Portuguese volume for that quarter. The dark blue is other language approval plans for that quarter. So you can see the bars, just by the bars, how big a proportion of the Spanish-Portuguese is of our foreign approval vendors. So if you just looked at the color, then we actually told the story. Spanish-Portuguese approvals dominate approval receipts. Okay, that's like a headline. Oh, thanks. That's our story. And I'm almost at the end of mine. So you can see that, I'm just showing you that. The other thing that we did was we tried to correlate the actual backlogs, the start and end of year backlogs, which are on the left side. The purple is the start of the year. These are cataloging backlogs for the same materials. So you could see that the backlog reduction in the 3 years we did cataloging on receipt was, it incrementally increased the amount that was reduced that didn't go into cataloging. So those two correlate, and I guess that's pretty much the end of time. Okay.
Yeah, it is.
How do you say your name? Lagace. Next up is Nettie Lagace from NISO.
Thank you, Rachel. Thanks everyone for coming to the Saturday sessions. I want to talk to you about a specific project that is newly underway at NISO. It's been underway for about 6 months, so it is one of our newer ones, and I'm not sure that we've been talking about it too much at different conferences, so I wanted to kind of highlight it and bring it to your attention. It's underway, and it's not going to be finished for a little while, but you should know about it. It's called the Tracking Link Origins Working Group. So what's NISO? NISO is the National Information Standards Organization, and I am Nettie at NISO. That is my email address. But NISO is not me, and it's not Todd, and it's not the other staff that we've got in Baltimore. It's all of you. It's everyone in the community, and that includes librarians, people who represent public, academic, consortia libraries. It is system providers, it is publishers, it is database vendors, it is people in the community who see problems and want to get together to find ways to solve them technically through recommended practices and standards. NISO publishes ANSI-approved standards. We are accredited by the American National Standards Institute, which is a nice imprimatur of quality and consistency and consensus, and all of our work it follows those kinds of values. But I have to say that now more and more we are publishing things called recommended practices, and these are a little bit lower level documents which can be a little bit more quickly maintained when things are moving quickly, as they have been in this community for quite a while. And in fact, the work that I'm talking about here is going to be published as a recommended practice. So just keep that in mind. There is a little bit of a difference, and you can call things standards, we don't mind. But from my perspective, as I'm processing things, recommended practices, we can move them through a little bit faster, which is nice. So yesterday here at Charleston, there was a very nice presentation by the NISO Discovery to Delivery Topic Committee that was represented here by Pascal Calarco, Christine Stone, and John Dove. And Christine had a really brilliant slide about the overall landscape of how content transfers from providers to libraries to systems, how connections are made from system to system, and also how NISO work falls into that. And I thought that was a really nice slide that I hadn't seen for a while, and so I recreated it last night for the presentation today. And I'm not going to go into it in too much detail, but basically we have users over here on the, there's no pointer, but users are accessing content through all the kinds of things that they access content through. We have content providers who send the content to these systems. They also send content, to the library. Libraries upload holdings to these kinds of knowledge bases and interface tools, and users pass through these from the interfaces, often through the link resolver or that specification of content, over to the full text. And if you were in the session this morning, in the Carolina room about access, you saw that things are actually much more complicated than that, but I won't get into that. There's a whole lot to say. But let's just say we're accessing from the databases through the knowledge base over to the full text. But what if you are a publisher and you're providing your content to those discovery interfaces, the index databases, and you want to be sure that users are accessing that content, that putting your content in those discovery interfaces is worth it for all the work you're doing. If you are currently using weblogs to measure access of incoming users to your publisher website, you might be missing some of that information. That's because when content goes through link resolvers, it is sometimes the case that the originating input of that is lost along the way to the publisher website. So that's the initiative that is the link origins, tracking link origins working group at NISO. This group is analyzing pathways that users access content to primary publisher material, to make sure that everyone's getting credit or being able to accurately count where users are coming from, no matter if they're coming from a discovery index, if they're coming from a website, if they're coming from a link resolver, that publisher is tracking that. And I think that's of interest both to publishers and to libraries, especially if you're working in a world that we were talking about downstairs an hour ago, where you've got users that are accessing material everywhere. Isn't it good to know how users are getting to content so that as a library, you know how your subscription money is getting used? So, how am I doing? 4 minutes, good, that's nice to see. So this working group, like other NISO working groups, is made up of people from the different parts of the stakeholder community. So obviously there's libraries present, but we also have publishers, primary publishers sitting on this group. We have representatives from Crossref from the DOI Foundation, also a technical guy from CNRI, the Coalition for Network Resources Initiatives, who maintains the DOI framework. Discovery index providers are also participating on this working group. It is co-chaired by Ken Varnum at the University of Michigan, who was here earlier at Charleston, and Gary Pollack at EBSCO. And so the deliverables that this group will be putting out about a year from now, we could say, is that they're putting together vocabulary that describes these transactions so that everyone is using the same language, that they're analyzing flows to illustrate how data is moving through this framework. As I said, they will be putting out a NISO recommended practice, so a lower level document, but hopefully it can be updated again more easily when the time comes, that talks about these user pathways and then provides recommendations for stakeholders how they might add additional steps or other processes to make it easier to track this information, to be sure that we all understand how users are getting to content. Also communication plans, so how people can take it up and use it. And then again, trying to make it easier for implementation. The group is also responsible for a proof of concept, so an actual test implementation that can help hopefully demonstrate to potential users how they might implement it. So right now, the group has been underway, as I said, for about 6 months, and they've put together a work plan, and that's being approved by the topic committee at NISO. And now I'd say they're in the discovery phase. And when I describe this to working groups, I usually say, well, this is when you're doing your research and development section. And right now, actually, and I see Julie's sitting here in the audience. Julie Su from IEEE is a wonderful participant because she's provided a lot of original material that the working group can then verify and discuss. And right now, one of the things that they're discussing is looking at all kinds of different flows from different kinds of examples, including different discovery interfaces, different link resolvers, and different publishers, to verify these things, make sure that every aspect is understood, and then they can take this up and generalize it for the recommended practice. So this is just an example of the work. And I've got a minute early because we've got a little more time, but we'll take questions at the end. So thank you very much. Thank you.
And our final presentation today is from Donna Gibson from Memorial Sloan Kettering and Stephen Altieri from Jove.
Well, good morning, everybody. We're delighted to be here today to provide you with a high-level view of the importance of reproducibility and where librarians can support data sharing across the research life cycles. I guess it's this one here. There we go. I thought I would set the stage and provide a bit of background about MSK. Most people, when they think of Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center, they think hospital. However, in addition to our focus on quality patient care, we also support cutting-edge scientists. In 1945, the Sloan Kettering Institute was founded with the vision of harnessing the latest research techniques in order to conquer cancer. The mission continues today in the form of 9 research programs, all focused on cancer biology. In the fall of 2006, the size of our research enterprise almost doubled with the official opening of a new research complex, the Zuckerman Research Center, a 23-story building uniquely designed to provide our researchers with an inspiring, interactive, and an efficient environment in which to work together. In support of our researchers, we do our best to understand their workflow and how information and the published literature integrates with their daily research activities. In December 2015, we launched a survey to assess how we could help with data management activities. During the course of this session, and hopefully with questions afterwards, I'll share some of the results.
Thanks, Donna. I'm pleased to represent Jove in today's presentation. For any of you who aren't already familiar with us, Jove is a video journal for the biosciences, and our mission is to improve outcomes in research through faster and easier reproducibility by publishing in a video medium. So even if you're not a research scientist yourself, you've probably noticed that this struggle about reproducibility has made its way into the news. And as you can see, it sometimes even knocks the election off the front page. and it should. So you're all probably familiar with a scenario or a storyline where the media announces a new breakthrough in biology, something that might promise a cure, an improvement in well-being, or a solution to the energy crisis. And then, several weeks or months later, there's a retraction. Scientists and researchers who found it impossible to recreate the results of the original experiment, and we're kind of back down to zero. We call this the reproducibility crisis in the sciences. Now, here you have some numbers from top institutions and companies, and they kind of illustrate just how difficult it can be for researchers at any institution to replicate the work published in traditional print journals. So with reproducibility as low as 1 out of every 10 articles read, it becomes very, very hard to advance science and make those breakthroughs that researchers are looking for and then build on to new breakthroughs.
So what is reproducibility? You would think this is an easy question to answer, but the published literature has many, many definitions. We settled on this one from an NSF subcommittee. And in essence, reproducibility refers to the ability of a researcher to duplicate the results of a prior study using the same materials as were used by the original investigator. And so why is this so important? Reproducibility and establishing best practices are crucial to the integrity of the scientific endeavor. The Reproducibility Project, Cancer Biology, is an open initiative run jointly by the Center of Open Science and Science Exchange to investigate the replication of preclinical cancer biology research. So 50 high-impact cancer biology articles published between 2010 and 2012 were ultimately selected, as well as a plan to replicate a subset of experimental results from each of the articles. Scopus and Web of Science were used to identify the paper's citation counts, which helped with the selection process. This is a great example of what researchers are doing to understand the potential challenges and rate of reproducibility. The organizers of this initiative believe strongly that, and I'm quoting, replication is central to the progress of science. If others cannot reproduce the evidence backing a scientific claim, then the claim loses status as scientific knowledge. Yeah, sticking together. The National Institutes of Health are also looking at ways to increase access to scientific publication and data sharing. Data is becoming a more valuable end product, and by sharing data sets, there's an opportunity to expand collaboration. Through their offices of extramural research, they plan to clarify and review funding application instructions and criteria to enhance reproducibility of research findings through increased scientific rigor and transparency. More importantly, they recognize that success will happen, but only with the participation and support of the research community. As information professionals, we have an opportunity to further support our research community with their data management needs. Research data is a scholarly output that should be organized, stored, findable, and ultimately reused, just like publications. Let's touch on 4 ways we can engage our researchers. Awareness. In December 2015, we launched a survey entitled Managing Scholarly Publication Data. We had the pleasure of working with our colleagues from the Rockefeller University Library, led by Carol Feltus. We decided on doing a joint survey because we thought it would be interesting to compare results and to see if there were any possible ways to join forces and collaborate on data management services. The survey was 32 questions, and while long, we had 215 researchers who took the time to answer. We also decided to supplement this data with one-on-one interviews with lab heads we determined generated large data sets. This is how we started our conversation, became aware of what matters to our researchers, and we're now in the midst of writing up our proposal for a service we know will be of value to our institutions. Education. Offering internal classes or promoting external workshops to our researchers about the research data lifecycle, reproducibility, and any other data management topic can help define our support role. However, we also need to ensure that we have the right skill sets and that our future librarians are able to handle the challenges of supporting open data and data management services. There are many resources available to date, both open sources and commercial, that support data management activities. Understanding both government and private agencies and their requirements for open data and data sharing, and even knowing the various scholarly journals' data availability statements can make you a resource as well. Being knowledgeable in promoting data management endeavors and promoting resources can be helpful in saving your researchers time and effort. Taking initiative with your information vendors and publishers to enhance existing products can also be beneficial to the larger research community. And finally, collaboration. Look for the low-hanging fruit. You can leverage services like DataCite and EasyID to obtain DOIs for your researchers' data sets. You can organize a DM portal of what you consider to be the most beneficial resources for your users. You can provide or point to data management planning templates or tools. Other more labor-intensive projects could include creating a data catalog, developing taxonomy to increase and facilitate discovery of the data sets. You could also explore obtaining your own instance of Dataverse, a data repository from Harvard, or Figshare, a commercial product for storing data. If you currently have an institutional repository, you can enhance the paper's record by including the DOI link to the data set. What types of services do you think the library should have as data management practices evolve? This was one of the final questions we asked during our one-on-one interviews as we collected feedback. And to be honest, many did not think of the library as a data management partner. But after talking about it, some of the top ideas that emerged were similar to what I shared in the previous slide and what you see here. The bottom line is that we do have an opportunity to collaborate with our researchers and be a part of the research team.
All right. Well, thanks again. And personally, as a publisher, I can't always speak to the internal workings of your libraries, though, I know how hard all of you do work to keep this ocean of information organized and useful for your researchers. In the last couple of moments we have here, I wanted to just highlight some of the MSK research that Jove is proud to have published. Now, this quote from a researcher, an MSK researcher, is indicative of a lot of the feedback I receive regularly from researchers and students around the world. There's always, hopefully with video, a greater transparency and increased reproducibility. And I'd like to think that Jove's contribution to solving the reproducibility crisis is to provide visual methods that not only make our own articles more easily reproducible, but also, to speak to something that Donna went through, as part of a collection or a saved search, something that would add to the reproducibility of all the research in the collection. But as we would say, if a picture is worth 1,000 words, what is a video worth? So on the left, you have the text protocol of the article I highlighted in the last slide, produced by MSK. And on the right is a still from the video of the same. And I will just take one moment to flip out and play that video article for you. And that same text comes in at this particular point.
Separate both uterine horns by cutting through the proximal end on both sides of the cervix. Then separate each oviduct from the uterus by cutting below the isthmus that connects them. Under a dissection microscope, use a 1 milliliter syringe with a hypodermic needle to flush the blastocyst out of the uterus and into manipulation medium.
So as you can see, there is a greater uptake in understanding with video as opposed to text alone. And I want to thank you all for taking a few moments to listen to us talk this afternoon, and we'll be happy to take any of your questions at the end of the session.
Thank you.
And we now have about 15 minutes for questions, so I'm going to step off the stage and have all of our presenters up on the stage. Let's give them another round of applause. Questions? All right, so just for the video, the question is for Michael and the room about what are some great examples of staff workspaces. You can.
I have a few examples because we've just done this recently at Emory, and I work in tech services, so we're in the basement. There's like one source of light, other than artificial, of course. But we did a lot of the things that Mike mentioned. I think we did. We have the standing and sitting carrels that are expandable. You can get up and down. Many people have taken advantage of that. Not me, because like you saw from my slides, I like to sit down a lot. So. But we've done that, and the cubicles are still purple and metal and kind of ugly, but they're spacious enough. But I think we're looking at level 1 where we live right now, and I think the administration is committed, even though a lot of the space down there has been given over to students and common spaces. I think that's probably not unique, but we're still in the library, so hopefully, we'll do better. But we are doing some of the things that he mentioned already.
Now add at my own university, at University of Connecticut, I mentioned that we're doing a large space redesign plan, and it'll be interesting to see how that evolves. But what we're doing right now is creating those kind of more interactive collaboration spaces with whiteboards and so on. And we're utilizing Slack and those kind of collaborative virtual spaces extensively. What we've also done is actually try to have each department have its unit within the department have its own collaboration space. And it can also be used as a phone room, so people can take sensitive calls there. People can lie on the sofa for a few minutes if they have a headache, that kind of thing, to kind of not only foster collaboration, but also good health and well-being more broadly across the different departments. And I'm certainly curious if anyone on the floor has any contributions.
Yeah, I think we came at this a different way at the University of Oklahoma.
Oh, you're getting a microphone in just a moment.
Posterity.
Carl Grant, University of Oklahoma. We came at this slightly different approach. We have maker spaces, but what I did was force my staff to go sit down with the users and to take courses and to work with the 3D printers and virtual reality side by side with the users. I wanted them to get into the mode of collaborating with our users, and our users to see that we're constantly learning just like they are. So there were a lot of key messages. It's hard to redo all of your spaces to work all this technology in. It's costly. So force your staff to go engage with your community side by side.
That's an interesting contribution, too, because UConn's moving its Hartford campus to downtown, and the library is actually going to be sharing space with the public library. And some of the, so we're going to be mingling academic and public users in some of these spaces, and we're actually going to be having shared spaces with both staff and users as well.
Hi, I'm October Ivins. I was able to tour the North Carolina State Tech Services staff area in their new Hunt library, which is so fantastic. If you haven't, go online. They have videos of the Hunt library. And you mentioned that. Their tech services space is one big room, has lots of windows. It is cubicles, but they're bright, really colorful. And work groups do not sit together. People are kind of randomly assigned to encourage incidental collaboration and networking and things like that. They do have group areas that you can reserve or you can just grab if they're not available. And I talked to some of the managers there and said, I don't see very many doors. You know, what do you do if you have to have a personal conversation or a personnel confrontation or something? They said, well, you know, we have other spaces that we can book for that. But they also, when they want quiet time, like to work on a report or to write or something, they use the faculty and student spaces that they can sign up for. There's a whole separate faculty area that the librarians also have access to that has a kitchen and stuff like that in it. And it's gorgeous. So if there are ever any job openings there, you should check it out.
Any further questions for any of the panelists?
Has peak Charleston saturation occurred?
Peak Charleston.
This is architecture on a larger scale, so I don't know what the workspaces exactly look like, but a really interesting development at Purdue University is that when they realized they wanted to be able to flip a lot of their large lecture classes in their undergraduate liberal arts program, they were having a lot of dropouts out of those classes, and they thought flipping it would be the way to do it. And on campus, the only rooms that were big enough to actually house the flipped side of the class were rooms in some of the library buildings. And it turned out turned out to be such a valuable place to have the flipped class, because then librarians could embed into the flipped classroom and the students could merge their work back out into the library. They didn't have to even go to another building. So they are now architecting a brand new library, entirely architected around the idea of librarians being embedded in flipped classes.
Sounds like a fantastic innovation. Thank you for sharing that.
I have a brief question for Nettie. If you could tell us what some of the next steps and possibilities for engagements in the development of the project are?
For engagement in that particular project? We try to be as open as possible, but just due to sort of overhead, it is a little hard to always have, send out constant missives about projects. But there's a couple of different things. First of all, every quarter, NISO, and in this case that would be me, puts out a little newsletter called the Working Group Connection, and it is a report of all of the different working groups and the things that have just happened in the last quarter. So I'm overdue on the October edition, which means it will be the November edition of the Working Group Connection. If you sign up for the NISO newsletter, and that's Newsline, it's on our website. I'll tweet out the link afterward, because our website is going to be redesigned next year and you'll see it needs it. But Working Group Connection is a good way to stay on top of things that are going on in all of the working groups. The second thing is, eventually, when things get boiled down and distilled, every one of our projects goes through what we call the public draft period, and which is a way for the working group to get public input on the draft before it is published, and then respond to the different questions and points that have been raised. So you will see, probably not any time immediately soon, but hopefully in maybe third quarter 2017, announcement from NISO about the availability of that draft, and there's different ways to find out about it. We publish it on our newsline, on our website. We also try to post it on different mailing lists in different places, so if you have ideas for us to communicate, I'm happy to take that. But the public draft period is typically 30 days, and that's a way for you to take a look at it and provide input. And then after that, the group responds to the questions, and then it's actually published at that point. I hope that's helpful. So even if you're not involved directly on the working group, there will be ways for you to provide input. And we also do try to talk about it as often as we can.
A If there's no other questions, I'll send you on your way to enjoy the last moments of your Charleston conference. Thank you very much for coming.